What makes people truly fulfilled? Is it love? Family? Success? Or is it finding out who you really are? What you are truly made of? So you know your purpose here on Earth and your connection to the universe. We exist as physical beings in a physical reality, while our mind is in constant communication with unseen forces in unknown worlds. We are the visible part of a potentially infinite, invisible realm. How do the two worlds, mind and matter, coexist, collide, and interact?
Because the energy is all around us and energy is all connected to all different types of energy, you can communicate with all types of different things.
In your head, you just need to think, please may I turn my energy on, or anything like that, a trigger of energy, and then just turn it on.
And to Joseph.
It's quite a warm sensation inside your body, it's quite tingly. And then your subconscious mind kind of realises it.
As a kid, I met him down this alleyway, and ever since we've been playing in my head or somewhere else.
But he speaks energy, it doesn't speak our language.
Like many children, when I was young, I was very, very sensitive. Even at the age of 5, I realized I could perceive the subtle energy. I would look at someone and I would see the energy around them. I could feel the emotions, what they were going through. I would put my hand up and I could hear their thoughts sometimes. That got me on a journey of discovery and research in the field of consciousness, how consciousness works in the physical world and how we can answer some of these questions. For example, when we sense the presence of someone, but there's no one there, what are we tapping into? What are we coming in contact with? How can we perceive an event before it happens or remotely at a distance? Is it possible to change the chemistry of your body or even your DNA? How is it that you can move a physical object without any contact with this physical object? Or use your consciousness to see without your physical eyes?
The rain was tapping, and the windows and the wind was banging.
These are the phenomena that we're exploring here with a new scientific approach that could potentially explain it all. And it turns out that this field that we call parapsychology is not only widespread, but it is universal.
I have about 100 articles published in journals, and each one of those usually reports between 1 to 5 or 6 experiments. So somewhere in the number of hundreds of experiments. In terms of people involved, a few thousand people, perhaps.
So I've studied probably numbering in the hundreds of cases. I've captured, I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of what we call EVPs, of recordings of voices.
There are actually many credible institutions around the world that have dedicated many years of research in this field of psi phenomena, or what we call parapsychology. There are programs in the government that ran for over 20 years with millions of dollars in funding, using psychic abilities, for example, to spy on a foreign government.
We know for a fact that the Russians were involved in this. We know for a fact that the Chinese were and are probably still involved.
The United States government and several other countries are more open-minded to this. Russia comes to mind.
The Japanese were very involved. In fact, Sony Corporation had a long ongoing parapsychology program.
We know our own CIA had been experimenting in psychic tests and abilities and projects like MK Ultra.
The Israelis had an interest in it and may still.
It's very well established.
If these credible institutions and governments around the world are dedicating so much research and funding into this field, you would think there's something there.
In graduate school in about 1970, I saw a banner on the wall that said, "Learn how to meditate." And I found out that I could debug the software I was writing in my nuclear physics studies in a meditation state much more accurately and quicker than I could if I were actually looking at the printouts. The lines that had errors in them were red. The others were black. And that kind of crashed my reality. Up until that time, like most physicists, I believed that if you couldn't measure it, then it didn't exist. So I would do experiments in that I could have one of these effects and then change a variable and then do it again and then change that variable a little more and do it again. From consciousness, your intent can modify future probability, can modify what happens in the physical world, which means that consciousness is the fundamental thing and the physical world is a derivative of consciousness. So I knew that consciousness theory should also contain physics theory.
I finished my neurosurgical training at Duke in 1987, and then I started work at Harvard Medical School after doing a fellowship in cerebrovascular neurosurgery, all along thinking I understood something about brain, mind, and consciousness. But that, of course, was the tremendous gift of my near-death experience, is finding out that what I thought was a worldview that we just assumed to be true is actually false, that consciousness is primordial. All of this emergent reality basically emerges from consciousness. And it opens the door to a tremendous amount of understanding about consciousness and the mind and the power that human beings have over their unfolding reality.
If consciousness is fundamental, where does the physical world end and consciousness begin?
The physical world is a product of the consciousness world. One is within the other. It's not an either-or. It's all one thing.
It isn't as though there's a physical world and there's a mental world. There's only one world. It's all consciousness. It's not just localized in there, it's everywhere. And it's also not in space, and it's not in time. It's somehow before space and time. That's what we mean by fundamental. Consciousness is a kind of a substance, a proto-substance perhaps, which is usually in a primordial, refined state that doesn't even appear to be matter or energy yet. But from that can emerge what we start seeing as a physical world. Just like ice can take on different phases, maybe we're talking about something like consciousness, which has different phases. So if consciousness is a continuum, then some forms of consciousness can appear to be hard matter.
Physicists of the 20th century in 1920 and 1930 pondered this quite a lot and concluded that consciousness must be there, even there was no direct way of detecting it. We could only see its physical effects. Consciousness as a whole can be described by the quantum attribute. It's just that the quantum attribute does not follow Newton's laws. It's not physical. It's an entirely different part of the description of matter in the universe.
If the physical world exists within consciousness, how come we can see one and not the other?
We see physical reality, and we think that we are physical bodies walking around in this physical reality. What we are is consciousness. We are pieces of consciousness playing avatars in a virtual reality game called this physical world. So a consciousness comes here with no memory. So when it logs onto its avatar, that avatar is all it knows. So all of its experience is experienced with that avatar, with that fetus, with that newborn. This is an apple, this is mama, you know, this is the door, this is my house. It just learns how to interpret the data. What's really happening is that the computer is sending this individuated unit of consciousness a data stream. That's how reality is created.
I do believe we live in a virtual game, but I don't necessarily believe that we live in a simulation.
Yes, I do.
No.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think simulation in the sense that it's like one giant video game.
I don't necessarily believe we live in a computer that somebody else created.
I feel like if that was the case, then there would be like technological glitches in the sky.
When I think about simulations or the Matrix, I believe we do.
We probably thought up this whole construct before we came here and decided, we're going to go in and we're going to play this game, and here are the rules, and we're going to go deep into it, and we're going to completely forget that we made this game.
I think we are the ones that are running the show.
I don't know who's running the show, but I can tell you at times I think it's a shit show. Complete shit show.
The waves that describe matter are basically spherical and surround the matter. But consciousness waves, which exist in the same quantum space, are now spiraling. Let's focus on the spin attribute because it is an attribute that is shared most intensely with the overall structuring of matter in the universe. My body has a whole lot of protons and electrons in it, and those produce a joint wave of great complexity that's describing my anatomy. Can you imagine that the description of spin in the universe starts with a global spin of the universe, which then restructures in more local spins, which have a memory of the initial global. We see all the galaxies rotating, and the stars in the galaxies are all rotating. The planets around the stars, like our Earth, is rotating once every 24 hours, and so on. Some of that rotation is a memory of the initial rotation. Therefore, the universe is imbued with this enormous description of rotation, from atomic matter scales to the global scales of galaxies and their clusterings and voids and the overall structuring of matter in our universe. Consciousness waves do share this attribute of spinning and rotating, and our minds can begin to interact with this.
If the universe is based on spin and consciousness waves and can connect two minds, how would we demonstrate that in real life?
I was at Fort Meade working as a Mideast analyst. What I didn't know is I lived next door to the operations officer and training officer for the remote viewing unit. They invited me over to their offices and sat me down and said, well, what we do here is collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology discipline called remote viewing. We essentially want to invite you to become a psychic spy. The US intelligence community had been following what the Russians were up to and the Soviets and discovered they were pursuing parapsychology pursuits. And so the CIA was obligated to check this out. And at a certain point, they were having such good success that the CIA said, we ought to be using it against the Russians, you know? And at that point, then it went operational and they started collecting intelligence against the Russians using remote viewing, and the Chinese and a bunch of other people. A viewer who is well-trained and has a lot of experience produces information that is clearly remote viewing in origin, you know, these clearly psychic, if you will, in origin, roughly 70% of the time.
Because of the Soviet aggression, I have asked the United States Senate to defer further consideration of the SALT II treaty.
In the 70s, when Jimmy Carter was president, they were trying to figure out how to base these missiles so that the Soviets couldn't take out our missile systems. So they built this racetrack plant, kind of a shell game deal, where you had a bunch of these shelters out in the desert, and you shuttle the missile randomly between the shelters, And that would make it practically impossible for the Soviets to actually hit that missile. Problem was, we had to find out if there was a way that the Soviets could beat the system. And so the SRI, Stanford Research Institute folks, did a study, and they were able to identify 100% of the time where the missile would be. And that information was provided to Carter, and Carter canceled the basing plan because it became obvious that there was a way of beating it.
I've directed that no high technology or other strategic items will be licensed for sale to the Soviet Union until further notice.
It did affect policy. It did affect a high-level government decision. And there is actually a letter from John Warner that confirms this.
If there is such a thing as a psychic spy, I was curious to learn how the soldiers may have been trained to spy on the Russians. Actress, producer, and inspirational speaker Rachel Brooks Smith, who is well familiar with mind-body work, was fascinated by the subject and decided to give it a try.
So, Paul.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Thank you.
We saw each other at that conference. When I met you, I thought Rachel would be fascinated by the remote viewing.
I am very fascinated, very excited to learn. I believe so much in, I guess, all of our superhuman abilities that we have that are untapped. And I am on such a path to discover those and strengthen those and share them. So I'm just, yeah, I couldn't be more excited.
Interesting, the term used, superhuman. I like to think that it's normal human.
I love that, yeah.
But that our society hasn't recognized the fact that this is part of normality. So remote viewing is an interesting thing. It's a way of focusing your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind knows the answer. It's your conscious awareness that doesn't. And so this serves to focus your subconscious mind, and then as you're going to write this stuff down, that's a way of bringing that into your conscious awareness. You're trying to get your subconscious talking to your conscious awareness. I've tried to narrow it down to very core elements to give you at least a flavor of how remote viewing works.
I would love to try.
Okay.
It's like a crash course.
Yeah, right.
It's a crash course. Every molecule, every atom that's here, we have over here.
After a few hours of intense training with Paul, Rachel felt ready for the next step.
What we're going to do is called an outbounder experiment. So Caroline and a couple of other folks will pick a target outside of here where we won't be able to know what it is. Then they will go to that target and they will interact with it as best they can. Maybe they can touch it or feel it or smell it or ride around it, whatever it is. Meanwhile, we'll be back here. You're going to go find them consciously. You're going to send your consciousness there to find where they are, and then you'll report on the location where they're at. And if you pick up on it, you'll report on the things that they're doing. Yeah. So
just to clarify, you don't know where we're going.
No, I have no idea. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So Rachel, what you're going to do is you're going to direct your consciousness to the location where Caroline, Evan, and Dylan have gone, and you're going to attempt to perceive and describe the setting that they're in, the interesting things there are to see, generally the things there are to experience,